Thank you for joining us for our webinar with Netramark Holdings Inc, AIAI on the CSE. My name is Jeff Hunter. I'm an associate portfolio manager with the Townshend, Somani and Hunter Group at Canaccord Genuity. Also on the line are our senior investment advisors, Dave Townshend and Raheem Somani. Today's call may contain forward-looking statements and is being recorded, so please check your email in the coming days for the replay information. Today we are joined by Mr. Archelios, Dr. Geraci, and Mr. Spiegel from Netramark. We're pretty excited to have them on. They've got a number of things ahead of them in a huge space. But with that, I'll pass it over towards my partner, Dave Townshend. Dave?
Yes, first, thank you all to the participants and to the people listening in. We're very pleased today to have Netramark, who are, I should say, in a very interesting space in the software space for clinical trials. So I will ask George to kick off the meeting here. George, over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for the introduction. I'm always excited to tell the Netramark story with the team. And we've got an amazing team, which I'll go over. And hopefully there's some questions at the end if we don't cover what it is that you were looking for. There's still some burning questions in your head. So with that, we'll get right to it. At our core, we often get asked this question: what's our vision? What are our goals? And essentially, we really have this search for having a material impact on the clinical trial space. The clinical trial space historically has a very, very low success rate. Essentially, about 12% of candidate medicines actually make it to commercialization. So what's really great about that for us is often in business, you're really trying to make sure you can articulate a very clear problem. And in this particular case, there's a very clear problem. Clinical trials are tough, have a very low success rate. And I think therefore our goal is to really try to have a meaningful impact on the clinical trial success rate through the technologies invented by Dr. Joseph Geraci. It always, to me, when you're building a company, you really need to have a really great team. My background is started in technology in the 90s with IBM. I've been involved in many different businesses and a variety of verticals, from digital space, e-commerce space, nanotechnology, retail space, quite a variety. And there's always a common thread when you're looking at building a business, and that's to really have amazing people. You can't do something successful without having an amazing team. And as I became CEO in March of 2022, so just about a year and a half ago, one of the things that we really were focused on at the time was trying to take a look at the assets that the company had at the time and where we wanted to focus. And once we decided we were going to focus on Netramark, we really needed to then figure out, okay, how are we going to bring a team together that is going to help commercialize the assets of Netramark that we're going to review with you today. It all started with Dr. Joe Geraci, who's on the call. He is a PhD mathematician who's got his postdoc in oncology and his postdoc in psychiatry. I think he's top 0.5% Mensa globally. I'm not sure, Joe, you can verify that over time. But his background has really been trying to solve this problem, and really focused over the last 7 to 10 years on trying to understand how he could have a meaningful impact using artificial intelligence and mathematics to really solve this problem that I just discussed. So Dr. Joe will talk a little bit about what our technology is in more detail, but at the core, he's the founder, the chief technology officer, the chief scientific officer of the company, and where the genesis of what we're presenting to you really began. The other couple of people that I just want to focus on, because our time is brief here, is Dr. Luca Pani, who Dr. Joe has known for a while as well, and who I've got to know really well. Dr. Luca Pani has joined as our Chief Innovation and Regulatory Officer. His background is he was the former Director General of the Italian Medicines Agency, where he controlled a multi-billion-dollar budget. Any drug that was going to go into that market would go through Dr. Luca Pani's hands. He now resides in Washington and obviously has an amazing Rolodex of contacts within the pharmaceutical industry. Dr. Luca Pani is the one who then introduced me to Josh Spiegel. So when we're building this company, we really needed to focus on somebody who really had a deep background in the clinical trial space. And Josh was fresh off a $330 million exit at a company called Geraci that was in the clinical trial space. That exit was to WCG Clinical. And so we presented our wares to Josh, and his job was really to come in and figure out, okay, what were we going to focus on from a market perspective so that we could have a clear vision of how we were going to go to market and commercialize this business. Just to be clear, when we get into this technology, what we're presenting to you today is not a vision of a technology platform that we want to build. This is a built tech stack where we're really actually focused on the commercialization process. The last few people that I do also want to highlight quickly are we've really been focused on building out our strategic advisors, and those are other key people that could help us from the perspective of commercialization. Dr. Larry Alfs recently joined as an advisory board member. He's got an extensive history in the pharmaceutical industry. He was a former executive director at Pfizer, therapeutic lead at Johnson & Johnson, a director at Novartis, et cetera. So a very deep background in the pharmaceutical industry and understanding clinical trials. Abhishek Agrawal, who works at GSK, he's director of partnerships at that company. He's also worked in the contract research organization space. He works out of New York. Again, another deep background in the pharmaceutical space. And then our most recent addition is Dr. Mary Ann Rizik. She was at one point the global vice president of CRO, which is Contract Research Strategic Alliance Partner Business Programs at Oracle. I know that's a mouthful, but essentially a very deep knowledge in the CRO, Contract Research Organization space, which are essentially channel partners for us and are very critical in the pharmaceutical space and in the clinical trial space as far as running clinical trials. So a very deep background in that. Also, she was senior vice president at IQVIA, a really large CRO. So a very extensive background in the pharmaceutical industry, and she's also joined as an advisor. So hopefully I've given you a quick overview of the people that are part of this team and helping to commercialize the technology that we have in Netramark. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of it now. And first and foremost, let's start at a very high level, which is the pharmaceutical industry and AI in particular. And when you start looking into this space, you start to realize that there are an assortment of challenges. Most of the buzz that you hear out there is really using AI to identify new molecules. And so that kind of lends itself to AI and would probably be the natural place for people to start because the data sets are large often, and that really lends itself to artificial intelligence. So that's one of the areas that potentially people look at and say, okay, is there an application of using AI and mathematics in the molecule identification space? The second area, which is very prominent and a clear problem and where we've decided to focus on, is what I discussed earlier, which is the 12% success rate of clinical trials, in particular in phase 2 and phase 3. So when you're running a clinical trial, you come up with your molecule, you run it through preclinical, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, as you work through to commercialization. And companies can be spending hundreds of millions of dollars. And the data shows that it often takes to actually get all the way to commercialization over a couple $1 billion. So it's a very expensive gauntlet to run with a very low success rate. And so another place where there's a potential for AI. And the last part is a lot of clinical trials have issues with placebo response or people responding to the placebo and causing the trial to fail. So these are at a very broad-based level. The problem areas that there could be an application for AI. What we ended up focusing on as a company has really been what I articulated earlier, which is this clinical trial gauntlet and the 12% success rate. In particular, phase 2 and phase 3 is where a lot of our emphasis is. So again, I think what I'm trying to articulate is a very clear problem that we're trying to address with the technology that we have. When you look at the market itself, it's a massive market. The cumulative clinical trials over time is closing in on 400,000. In the last 12 months alone, at the end, there was just over 5,000 interventional clinical trials that have been started and initiated. So it's a really large, robust, growing market. I think you can see that the pharmaceutical industry is permeating every aspect of life in the world. It's a huge market globally. And then the budgets that we typically would be drawing from are what we call the clinical trial support services, which are estimated to be around 20 billion and are growing to about 37 billion is the estimate by 2030. So we have a really large market that we're trying to address with our technology. So let's now start to zero down into what exactly we do with respect to attacking this 12% problem. So there, as I had articulated earlier, most of the play in the AI space and the pharmaceutical industry is in molecule identification, kind of what I call up the funnel. And then you start to ask, why aren't there more players actually addressing the clinical trial failure rate, which seems to be the obvious place? I think some of the assumptions are that if we can identify molecules using artificial intelligence, that by design, we are going to improve the clinical trial success rate because of the methods that were used to identify these molecules. At the recent beginning of the year, the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference, I heard some of the panelists saying that the expectations are that within about 10 years, we'll see some of those artificial intelligence identified molecules get to commercialization. It's a long path to that to getting to that commercial drug discovered by AI. In the interim, you've got all these clinical trials that are going on, and we really need to have a solution for that. However, the data sets are small and there are other complexities. And this is where Dr. Geraci has really focused a lot of his time, which is how do we ingest these small data sets? And in a typical clinical trial, you can see that over 95% of clinical trials have under 1,000 participants and around 60% have 100 or less. So these are by definition smaller data sets, which is, we have to be careful when we talk about smaller data sets. Smaller data sets, when I talk about smaller data sets, number of patients, but the number of variables associated to the smaller data set of patients can be thousands. So this is still a very complex problem to solve, which is what Dr. Geraci has really focused on, and what is forms the foundation of our proprietary differentiation. So I'm going to be turning it over to Dr. Joe here, where we're really now going to talk about the technology. I think I've talked about the market and the market size. Now we're going to talk about the technology that has been built that we're in the process of commercializing. So I'll turn it over to you, Joe, and we're going to start really by talking about AI and the technologies that we've got. And I think Dr. Joe is going to also give an overview of AI in particular, since it's a very complex subject. Joe, I'll turn it over to you. Oh, you're on mute, I think.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. So hi, everybody. Yeah, thanks for having us on. So I'm going to quickly just review what we're doing and how we're attacking this issue. And to start, I know that, you guys get bombarded a lot with a lot of language about artificial intelligence, and I'd like to break it down just very quickly. So in general, what we really have access to currently in the field of AI is a subfield that we call machine learning. And basically machine learning are a set of algorithms, software, that are able in some sense to write their own code, to write their own software in some way, right? So instead of me telling a machine, okay, now do this, then do this, and do this, like, baking a cookie. What you do is you allow the machine to look at data, and the actual underpinnings of the software allow the machine to encode in its own way. It could be geometrically, it could be with neural networks, right? But it encodes in its own way how to get a task done, whether it's to predict whether a picture is of a bunny rabbit or a cat, or if it's to, understand a patient population and figure out why placebo response is so high. And so that's machine learning. And so what's happened is this moniker, this AI terminology is actually the field of all of this stuff put together. But what's happened, though, is that it's evolved. And so we usually use AI to refer to some of the deeper methods, like deep neural networks and these large language models, where they encode huge amounts of information so that they can start imitating human tasks. That's the way the language has evolved now, right? So, and a large language model is just a type of machine learning algorithm that has been trained on huge amounts of literature, like, millions of pages of literature, so that it can start to mimic the game of of language. So at NetraAI, at Netramark, what we've done is we've developed a hub called NetraAI, which is a really powerful way to understand patient populations. And these are supported by modules, two of which are NetraPlacebo and NetraGPT. And the main driving force behind the company is our ability to look at these smaller data sets. And like George said, they can, there could be millions of variables, often thousands. And what the system does is it tries to learn as much as it can about the explainable subpopulations within a patient data set. And this is easy to understand. It's just, we're all different. And a small data set doesn't reflect, the whole universe of disease, but it does reflect certain critical aspects when you're studying a patient population for a clinical trial. And so what our system is really, really great at is saying, hey, I understand why this subgroup of people are responding to a drug, or why this subgroup of people are responding to placebo. And so one of the main, differentiators of our company is not only the ability to see this heterogeneity and the ability to do it with a small data set, but also its ability to explain itself. And so this brings us to NetraPlacebo and NetraGPT. NetraPlacebo uses a psychological scale to help us understand, really what is the difference between a drug and placebo. And NetraGPT, what it does is it allows us to enter this very exciting new era of generative AI, right? And again, just to go back, generative AI is, again, just a machine learning algorithm that learns how to mimic what it learns, right? So if you show it a bunch of pictures of people dancing, it can start producing pictures of people dancing. And this generative AI is what's being used for these large language models. Simple as that. It imitates what it's learned from the literature. The benefit to us, and what puts us in a very interesting space from a market perspective, is that we're one of those companies that can optimally take advantage of this new frontier, because after the NetraAI explains what's going on, the NetraGPT module can literally automate the report making process and pass the insights through a large number of literature and citations to then translate what the machine is finding even further. And so this puts us in a very special place in the market. George, want to go to the next slide? So, and just very quickly, I'll just tell you, and we can go back. One of the things we want to communicate is that the top, so let me just illustrate something. So what you're looking at here are actually lung cancer patients. So that red, look at the top cluster. The red group are people that have a subset of lung cancer called adenocarcinoma, and the black is squamous cell carcinoma. The point is two different types. And the machine learning, the standard AI that people are using, did the top, right? And it's good. You can see there's a very clear separation. And this is a representation of how the patients look in 4 dimensions according to standard AI. And like I said, it does a great job. The bottom is what our technology does. If you notice, there's all these little cluster representations. Now, it's not a clustering algorithm we're using, but it creates this representation. And what you're actually looking into is a much higher dimensional space and a much higher resolution perspective into the disease. And what this means is it allows pharmaceutical companies to understand their patient populations at a resolution that's impossible with other systems. They can, and not only do they get these segmentations, but it also explains why each of these groups are being segmented. And in this example, the machine was successfully able, without us getting involved, figuring out which people had the more aggressive form of the adeno, a different type of squamous cell carcinoma, and even recommended a new way to treat this disease. And we just got that published and peer-reviewed recently. So that's just to summarize. The big differentiator here is that our process allows the pharmaceutical companies to know their patients in a way that is otherwise impossible. And it does it through this novel mathematics that I developed for this purpose of understanding patient populations better and driving better performance in clinical trials. In this example here, you can see the machine successfully extracted a model, a hypothesis about why people were responding to placebo in a bipolar trial that from data that Takeda gave us. The amazing thing here was that not only was this model illuminating, because it was able to explain very clearly, it was able to discover elements in the data set that the statisticians and the clinicians didn't even know were there, but we tested it. And we were able to replicate this model on the drug that failed, which essentially said that their drug was behaving like placebo. But this is very powerful because for drugs that have a chance, we can use things like this. And this is what Netramark is doing. We actually utilize the insights driven by these, by this artificial intelligence to then recommend to pharmaceutical companies, look, you can actually pass your pivotal trial if you make these adjustments. And so you need this kind of precision to be able to do that. And that's what the goal was, and this is what we've achieved. NetraGPT is, as I was describing, was our way to interface with this new frontier of large language models. So think about it. I built the system that is explainable because it, when I was a professor and I was working with these different groups in oncology and psychiatry and pharmaceutical companies, they needed to know. It wasn't just good enough to have this black box predictive model. That's not very useful to them for this purpose. And so I built a system that was able to clearly explain, but the explanations are very technical, even for physicians, right? Because it has to do with molecular machinery and other factors. And no doctor knows everything across the board. So we're now at a place that, because we prepared so well for this upcoming frontier, that explainability is now is enhanced even further. Not only that, we're able to pass the insights that the AI comes up with through all this literature. In this example, you're seeing here how the system was actually able to, and I actually competed against the system. I tried to do this myself. It took me 2 weeks. I found a really cool insight in a subpopulation in ALS. This was a global competition. And then we unleashed the newest version of NetraAI. And within 45 seconds, it was telling me things that took me weeks to figure out using the tool, right? So it's fascinating. And we were actually the only group that was able to extract this insight from the subpopulation. Not only that, the insight was exactly aligned with what is cutting edge in the field of ALS. And so, yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions, but George, I think that's
perfect. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it. I'm going to turn it over to Josh, who is really focused on, as I mentioned earlier, the commercialization. We're going to start with a slide that talks about summarizing the value when we're out selling our technology. Josh, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Nice to speak with you today. Really, the value in the differentiated product that we're selling with the NetraAI is really the ability for clinical development teams. And when we talk about on the next few slides who we're really speaking to, it's pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies, and then the people in that ecosystem, and really looking at high-level contacts there, either chief medical officers, chief science officers, really how we can improve the success of their endeavors and really take this kind of, as George and Dr. Joe went through, like this very prone to failure process, and really put more visibility and really more confidence in what they're doing and ways that they can improve it. And so really what we're selling them and what we're providing is really this ability to de-risk and really see how their medicine is working in the patients that they're actually testing it in, really leverage these expensive early phase trials that they're doing to really make that decision and that expensive trial more valuable to them and really enhance that chance of approval and then in utilization of those medicines. And so really taking that as Dr. Joe showed you, those patients, and really improve that success rate by showing you the patients most likely to improve, which ones most likely to be placebo responders that you don't want, and really to maximize that effect size and really take what you've learned in those previous phase 2 trials that have, some of them have 50, some of them 150, before you go to those larger 300, person trials, really understand what you have. And then really, what are the hypotheses that ways you can modify those trials? And so how can you make those key tweaks, those key interventions that really can ensure that success in that investment? Kind of went a little bit over who we're going after, but really the areas where there's the most drug activity is really primarily our focus, really in oncology trials, CNS and neurology and psychiatry trials, and metabolic and rare disorders are where the system that Dr. Joe has perfected has really gone into that and really can show value add and really separate those heterogeneous disorders. I think oncology is kind of leading the way, where they understand kind of that people are different in that specialization, how they can see first line, second line, what are the best targets for their medicines. And really we want to take that to their studies so they can understand what's the best way and best approaches to get those targets. And then moving into other areas. And we've worked on publishing with our medical team, as well as other companies co-publishing and large pharmaceutical companies, some of our findings in ALS and rare disorders and other oncology and GBM. So we're really working on that research strategy as well to really engage our customers and engage the kind of academic and research community to really show the value of what the technology can bring them. So that's really a key focus of ours in those therapeutic areas, and engaging with these chief medical officers, heads of translational medicine and clinical development, as well as the chief science officers, really want to understand, why did these people respond? Why didn't they? I have some uncertainty about these toxicology events that might be a threat to shutting down my trial. How can we avoid these really costly errors? And I think people that have seen things go wrong, which is most of them as these trials have failed, fail more than they succeed, really are keen to our message about how can I learn more about this before I, put this plane in the air? How can I do the most I can to make sure that it's as safe as possible? And then the last piece there is the channel strategy. There's a lot of activity, not just, that kind of do different types of services and technology for pharmaceutical companies, be it clinical research organizations, which do, kind of either functional support for certain areas or really outsource the entire trial, as well as other technology vendors that collect data like electronic data capture systems, ECOA, electronic clinical outcome assessment systems, and other types of companies that are in this field that are natural partners for us, and that they don't have a way to analyze data in this new way. And they're, want to add and differentiate their services to their customers. And so that's the kind of community, those kind of dialogues are happening right now. And we're in the kind of the advanced stages in some of getting preferred provider status. So that's really what we're kind of focused on in that strategy. And so kind of what's the ideal customer, and kind of I think the ideal customer profile, and, how do we kind of engage with them is the question. So we target, as I mentioned, large pharmaceuticals and biotechs. We want to show that kind of value to them and how we can improve their trial. It is software that's already built, but we kind of put some services around it to really make it more accessible. And so we take the data in, and we have these kind of per engagement assignments where we'll take the data in, give them a report, and really focus in on what their needs are to really develop that based on their early phase data to show them what value we're going to add for their late phase, projects. And so that's kind of the way that we work. We give them reports, we evaluate their data, we look at all the different types. I think there's some on this slide, just RNA-seq, fMRI, clinical measures, clinical scales. What is going to be the variables that actually emerge to be the most important around their success, and give them advice on how to manage that risk and to really ensure that success, for these very expensive large phase programs. And this is just kind of I'd say a nice graphic to show what we can do to enrich their trial, to really take that kind of information and do it within the current regulatory framework, to find a way that's very explainable for them. This population is going to respond very robustly or this population will have issues and will not, kind of exhibit a response to your medicine. So you definitely want to not have them in there. Or this group might have a tox event. They might be at higher risk of having some sort of adverse event that might get your trial, suspended or even, canceled. So these are really ways that we can show our prospective customers how we can, kind of add to their, value by really giving them extra decision support and extra visibility when before they were just looking at, before the beginning of the study, the end of the study, and a few endpoints. This way, with the technology that NetraAI encompasses, they can look at all the variables in conjunction, and really this technology pulls out the most meaningful combinations of variables. I think this is just a little bit about what we can, the graphics of how it puts it together, but we sell through our system and NetraPlay access. So it's a service, but also a technology that they can log into. So the chief medical officers, their development officers have access to our SaaS platform where they can look at their data once it's been uploaded by us to go look and see how they can take a look at what the different patients are doing that they've collected in their previous studies and how they can look at them in different dimensions. And as George mentioned, we've really gone to market pretty recently. George, you want to take this? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So when we look at our business model as far as how we're going to build our sales pipeline, which is very important, we've got a multi-pronged approach. One is to leverage the leadership network that we've got, as I explained earlier in the presentation. We have engaged a company called Pharma Targeting, which does all the research that we need to understand who we target, exact phase of their drug, whether they're targeted, who the decision makers are. So we have a real robust kind of inside sales outreach program. In late April, we started our aggressive conference schedule to begin really getting on the road to speaking to people, building a channel strategy, which includes creating relationships with contract research organizations and other data providers. And our goal really was to build the pipeline to about $5 million in opportunity. Our year-to-date results, we launched Netramark officially in January of this year, where we had a couple leads in the pipeline early on in the year. We've now grown our sales pipeline to over 50 leads in our pipeline and over 10 channel partner discussions that we're working through. So from April till now, I think we've made some really, really robust progress when it comes to building our sales pipeline. This is really the bulk of the presentation. The main last couple slides that I want to just summarize with quickly is, hopefully in the presentation today, we've done a really good job of articulating there's a clear problem to solve. 12% of candidate medicines make it to commercializations. There really is a thirst for solutions to help. A compelling solution. Hopefully our team has done a good job of articulating that the NetraAI and NetraPlacebo and NetraGPT offerings that we have, or technologies and modules that we have, really create a compelling solution to address the problem. I think we've also outlined that we have a large addressable market, billions of dollars in this budget, thousands and thousands of clinical trials that are going on. And then we've got an experienced management team that are articulated. These are what all I call are kind of the ingredients to building a cake that's actually going to grow and flourish, and a business that's really going to flourish. What we also need is a little bit of a tailwind, and that comes in for us, a robust industry macro trend. AI. AI is not a flash in the pan. It's not something that's going to be here and then is gone in another year. I think this is going to permeate every business in every vertical around the world, and the pharmaceutical industry is certainly going to be part of the macro trend. So you take all of these ingredients, which I think are really critical to building a high value company, and then you marry that with some really high valuation revenue multiples. So in this industry, these are Oaken and Concert and GNS Path, Citro and Unlearn are all, these are all private companies. It's very hard to find public competitors. Essentia is a public company. A lot of these are molecule identification companies that have some clinical trial de-risking technologies within them. Companies like Unlearn are certainly competitors to ours, or an Alkin. And you can see the average multiples here are 34 times revenue. And so what we think is there's a really robust opportunity for market cap expansion as we begin to commercialize through the tail end of this year, and we begin to announce some contracts and some channel partner relationships. That's the end of the presentation. I want to turn it back over to the Canaccord team, and we'll be happy to field any questions that you guys might have.
Thanks, George. Just quickly, if you can touch on highlight number 10 slide. The clinical trial market is robust. Just want to highlight and focus on those areas where you're really targeting on that page.
Yeah, so the clinical trial market, I'll turn it over to Josh to discuss quickly. I think hopefully we've articulated it, but our focus within the clinical trial market. Josh?
Yes, our focus is really on pharmaceutical, kind of big pharma and biotech companies with late phase assets, meaning they are in the clinic, where they have either some late phase 1 data or phase 2 data, or maybe have gotten at least one phase 3 pivotal trial done in kind of those therapeutic indications that are of a lot of work, a lot of activity, like oncology, CNS, hematology, some other, the areas where there is, kind of a huge amount of unmet need, and where success rates in clinical trials are kind of not where they should be, as well as areas where they have to do placebo-controlled studies, where our Netra placebo that Dr. Joe mentioned is also, be able to be leveraged and really solve a lot of those problems as well.
And can you explain the pricing model for this service? If we see a contract or a news release, what we can kind of formulate in our mind?
So it's a combination of software license and service fees that kind of range from $150,000 to $500,000, depending on the level of complexity, the level of data that we're looking at, and kind of the stage of the engagement. Some initial pilots are closer to that $150,000 US kind of price, and usually that's kind of recognized over a 6-month period of time, maybe longer if they have a tail on using the software for longer.
I do want to add to that too. The first 5 to 10 contracts are very important for us to aggressively price our offerings. And so when we're talking about that 150 to 500,000 US dollar contract range, I think we've got to earn our stripes, to be frank, with respect to how we can ratchet up our pricing model. If you can imagine, you're going into phase 3, you're about to spend, 50 million, 70, $100 million, whatever that might be in that phase 3.
Even 300 million. I mean, these trials are extremely expensive.
So you can imagine, as we start to get more contracts and more success, I think you're going to see us reevaluate our pricing strategy over time, Jeff.
Perfect. And then you mentioned contract research organizations in the clinical trial space. Roughly which percentage of trials are done in-house versus farmed out to these organizations?
The majority, over 70% are farmed out to at some level, be it the complete outsourcing of most activities, or just kind of certain pieces like biostats or site identification and monitoring. So there's certainly kind of but CROs, and it's been the continued kind of trajectory of this industry, where very, very few pharmaceutical companies, do everything themselves. They really do look for their kind of capacity on discovery and the marketing of an approved medicine as their core competency, and they really leave the execution of the regulatory trial towards those outsourced services. So the market that is served by the folks that we're talking to is just from the few, as George mentioned, CROs that were already kind of in that path to preferred provider status is quite substantial.
And then what percentage of this market, which is pretty sizable, are you specifically targeting? So small scale sets of populations versus large, and where do you see it?
Yeah, we're agnostic in terms of the size of the trial, right? We can handle everything, and the benefit is that we can, attack some trials that other groups couldn't. But to answer your question, if you were to look at the data as of 2023, we're in a position where we can address about 67% of the market. And that's because, if you exclude academic trials that, we're not going to earn money from, right? Or exclude, surgical trials, and a few other things, we're left with about 67% of the market.
And one last question. This is Dave. Can you walk us through where you were a year ago, where you were in May, and where you are now?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I think that's an important question. So for those people that are watching today, many of you have been probably involved in the company from when it was called Neuroscene. When I became CEO in March of 2022, there were an assortment of other assets. And then through August, it took us up to August of 2022 to really recruit the new management team that I highlighted. And so that was quite a process of doing that. And then really tabling all the other assets that we had and put all chips into Netramark and the opportunity that we've articulated here. So we really, in August, had the team in place. By the end of December, we really had spent those with the team. We'd really spent that time really focused in on the market we wanted to address, how we were going to build and communicate the offerings that we wanted to have. And then in the new year, in 2023, which was the new year for us, that's when you saw the announcement that we called it, we changed the name to Netramark to try to make sure the market understood that that's the asset that we were focused in on. And very specifically then in April, and late May, that's when we started really aggressively trying to build our sales pipeline. So in January of 2023, we basically had, maybe 1 or 2 leads in our sales pipeline. Now, fast forward, we've grown that to over 50 leads. And when I say a lead, I don't mean us putting, let's put a pharmaceutical company into our lead list, because who wouldn't want to be doing business with a Pfizer or somebody like that? When I say lead, that means that there's been some level of communication where there's been outreach from us, and then there's been interest shown by the other party. That's how they make it onto our sales pipeline. And then it becomes the onus is on us to essentially nurture those leads over time and try to get a conversion rate into a sale. So there's been a huge leap when it comes to the number of leads in our sales pipeline. And then the other thing that Josh alluded to as well, which is, when it comes to the channel strategy, it's very, very important for us to make sure that we partner with CROs in particular and other organizations, but CROs, because they're already doing the work, if you will, of running the trial for the pharmaceutical company. They already have those trusted relationships. So if we can begin to build a channel relationship strategy with companies like CROs, that allows us to not be starting the sales process from stage 1, which is, who's Netramark? Why are you credible? Why should I talk to you? That allows us to get the CRO or the channel partner to vouch for us essentially and say, hey, this is our preferred provider for clinical trial de-risking services. We think that it could be of value to your trial. So they're a trusted provider and vendor for that pharmaceutical company. And we kind of come into that arrangement on the back of that CRO. And those conversations, we're not doing any exclusive arrangements with CROs. We've got about 10 that we're in discussions with respect to becoming a preferred provider, which we think will further accelerate our sales pipeline build. So I think we've made, hopefully, Dave, that answers your question. We've made a lot of really robust progress and really anticipate here very shortly beginning to announce some of these relationships. So now when the listeners can see, we've entered into agreement with a CRO, hopefully from what we've just discussed, they can understand what that means. And one last thing that I do want to make sure everybody does understand when it comes to progress is, when we talk about $150,000 to $500,000 US contract, that's for a drug in a specific phase of a clinical trial. So what's really important to understand is, when you finally do all the work to penetrate into having a master service agreement relationship with a pharmaceutical company, many of these biotech and pharma companies have many drugs in their pipeline. So you're not going to go in and say, they've got 15 drugs in their pipeline and start doing work on all 15 of those candidate medicines. You're going to start with one. So when we talk about those contracts, that's for one candidate medicine, a specific phase of a clinical trial. Then you can imagine, as we ingest that data, do good work, deliver results and value back to the pharmaceutical company, the idea is that you get a bit of a halo effect, and now you'll start penetrating other candidate medicines that are within the drug pipeline of the pharmaceutical company. So as your listeners start to see a contracts announced with a company, you got to really understand there could be another 10, 15, 20 drugs that company has in its pipeline that will have an accelerated arrangement and relationship with us as we begin to deliver results. Hopefully
Great.
that answers your question, Dave.
Oh, it does. And I'll just close up here. People that have asked other questions, we'll get back to you directly. We'll go to the company. We're in the interest of time. I'm just going to ask one final thing, and that is, well, actually a two-parter. First, what can, if I'm not going to ask you to give guidance, but I'm going to ask because, we want to know, and the clients want to know. They're investors. So what pivotal events might we expect in the next 90 days? And secondly, I'd like all three of you to comment on just the company and where you feel it is.
So as far as pivotal events, the most important things for us to accomplish in the next 90 days are contracts, right? So the validation of product market fit, it's all great for us. And we're trying to be very transparent with this. It's all great to talk about how great our technology is, etc. The ultimate validation of a technology is a market that pays you money for your technology. And so what are pivotal events? There are two key things that go around in my mind. Number one, contracts. Because that is an indication of the market acknowledging the value that you're offering them. So that's number one. And number two, announcing relationships with these contract research organizations, right? So 3 out of every 4 clinical trials that occur are using a CRO. That is the conduit into a lot of these pharmaceutical companies, especially when you're new. It allows us to really enter in as if like a Trojan horse, really enter in on the backs of a reputable arrangement. So in my mind, there are 2 things important: contracts and channel relationships that we announce. Those are pivotal things that I think validate what we're trying to do, the problem we're trying to solve, and how we're trying to commercialize our technology. And sorry, what was the second part of your question, Dave? Oh, you're on mute there, sorry.
Just ask Josh or Josh directly. Josh, in the time you've been with the company, right, you've made tremendous strides forward. I'd just like you to comment on where you think the company is and where you think the company goes in the next year, or where it can possibly go in the next year.
I think the strides is really, kind of honing in the technology for its best use. I think that was really the early phase, and then getting qualified and getting a regulatory compliance system is something that I think we didn't mention about, the work that we're doing to be, preferred providers for these pharmaceutical companies, as well as for the CROs, is getting that, 21 CFR Part 11 compliance to the system. So we can now be in that kind of conversation and really kind of building out this cadence of white papers, publishing, and conference appearances. And we've had a poster already accepted at an upcoming pancreatic cancer event, and really kind of getting at that forefront of where these decision makers are. So I'd say the largest kind of progress has really been, kind of honing in on those kind of the best use cases, as well as kind of evolving the platform to be ready and in front of these large pharmaceutical companies and channel partners. So I think that's been the exciting progress that we've had.
That's very
go to
exciting
George
stuff.
or Joe, any other kind of, I'd say those are what I'm most excited about, is really how we built this pipeline and really now getting associated with this new use of technology.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, I would just add that George and Josh have empowered me to bring the technology to this place where we're very close to where it's a dream to see this thing work the way it is. It's really powerful and very cool. So it's very satisfying. So I'm excited about that aspect.
So are we. So in closing up here, I just wanted to thank everybody for the time, and everybody that is online. And for those offline, there will be a replay. We'll send that out. But we're very happy with the company and its progress. And again, thank everybody for your time, and thank you guys for your hard work. We really appreciate it. Good afternoon to
you.
everybody. Bye for
Thanks
now.
for having us.
Bye.
Take
Thank
care.
you.